help you up the stairs just in case, you know. Grab them. There we go.
Thank you.
I got the best bit.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. The Honourable Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, the chairperson of the Luthuli Museum, and the esteemed council members, the Deputy or Vice Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and all representatives from the university, the councillors in attendance, the dear Luthuli family who have become my family in South Africa, my dear sister Ya Asantewa, Dr. Ngidi, great Pan-African sister, leader, and the head of the Afro-Ecology Center, and all of you here from the Afro-Ecology Center. All leaderships present, students, teachers, all fellow South Africans, fellow Africans, and friends of Africa. I am truly honored to be here today. Those of us from outside this country, when we hear your national anthem, something happens inside us. Because believe you me, we were all South Africans about 2 decades ago. We all were feeling and working and thinking with you. I thank the Luthuli Museum for inviting me to be here to share with you a few thoughts on our great fathers and mothers, and to deliver this keynote speech in honor of Chief Albert Luthuli. But you know, I'm not here only in my personal capacity. I'm here really for what I represent. And that is a vision that refuses to die. You know, in Ghana we say, Nkrumah never dies. But we are not talking about the mortal man. We are talking about the body of ideas he left for us. So to all great leaders, Chief Albert Luthuli never dies. Nelson Mandela never dies. Kwame Nkrumah defined Pan-Africanism as an objective to be reached. The total liberation and unification of Africa and Africans. I'm happy to be here today for the cause of African unity. It is so important to remind ourselves of where we come from, where we are going, and how to get there. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about the shared vision of 2 African giants, Chief Luthuli and Osajifo, as we respectfully, affectionately call Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Osajifo Kwame Nkrumah, on whose great shoulders we stand, are 2 men who were leaders of an organization, the ANC, and of a country, Ghana, at the same time. Their struggles serve to guide us as to how we chart our own liberation journey. We are looking to the past for inspiration. We can't deny that. But we cannot claim someone else's experience and hard work and ride on it without going through our own struggles, trials, and triumphs. We cannot ride, yes, we cannot and we don't want to ride on the coattails of others. We are seeking fresh and new ways to implement those ideas in our current experience and under our current circumstances and conditions. We have to write our own story and build our own successes. We are having this conversation at a time when recent developments in our continent necessitates that we quicken our steps towards unity. We see African men rising up against fellow African women. What do we gain from gender-based violence, from femicide, but broken hearts and broken homes? It is significant that I'm the first woman to give this lecture at this particular time. It could not have happened at a less opportune moment. I am proud to take a stand with all women here, all women in this country, all women all over the world, against violence against women. Today we see African states occasionally closing borders over trade and security issues. We see Africans rising against fellow Africans over economic discontent and sheer frustration. We see African workers rising up against fellow African workers. It is time we Africans stop seeing each other as foreigners. Have we forgotten so soon that we stood together as one to defeat colonialism and apartheid colonialism? What do we gain from entrenched micronationalism but crises and conflicts? We are one people with a common heritage and a common destiny. Who is the enemy? Kwame Nkrumah once asked, who is the enemy? And he answers, the enemy is imperialism and not a fellow African. Our energy must be harnessed to change the economic policies that impoverish our people and rob us of jobs and a better standard of living. We continue to be energized by the ideas generated by Chief Luthuli and Kwame Nkrumah, two brothers, I would say. I see Africa as a big compound house, where the older one, Chief Luthuli, was born in the southern part, while the younger one, Kwame Nkrumah, was born in the western side. They were of the same ancestry, of course. They were both teachers, preachers. They went on to become activists and politicians. Both believed that education and collective agency empower us to change our destiny. They were liberation leaders. While Chief Luthuli taught at Blaaubosch and Adams College, his brother on the western side, Kwame Nkrumah, also became a teacher at the age of 17 in a small village in western Ghana. Nkrumah moved to a government training college where he met the celebrated Dr. Aggrey, James Aggrey, known as Aggrey of Africa. I believe he came here to South Africa at one point. Now, Aggrey is well known for his famous saying that if you educate a man, you educate an individual, but if you educate a woman, you educate a nation. As a student in Lincoln University, Kwame Nkrumah was a teaching assistant in philosophy and an instructor for a while as a professor of philosophy, logic, elementary Greek, and Negro civilization. Both these two giants preached in the United States. Nkrumah had a degree in theology from Lincoln University, and he preached in several churches, Philadelphia, New York, Washington. Chief Luthuli, on the other hand, was one of the leaders of the Christian Council, as we heard, of South Africa, and through that did a speaking tour in the United States in the late 40s, by which time Kwame Nkrumah had returned home to preach the gospel of liberation. The land needed salvation from the heinous sin of colonialism and imperialism. On the eve of Ghana's independence, I want you just to imagine the scene. The leader of independence is speaking to his people, declaring that the country is free forever. But what does he tell them, amongst other things? Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. So, at a time when we are steeped in micronationalism, our leader is telling us this is meaningless unless the whole of Africa and all Africans are free. In his autobiography published in 1956, Nkrumah says, "I have never regarded the struggle for the independence of the Gold Coast as an isolated objective, but always as part of a general world historical pattern. The African in every territory of this vast continent has been awakened, and the struggle for freedom will go on. Our task is not done, and our safety is not assured until the last vestiges of colonialism have been swept from Africa." Ghana went to set up the African Affairs Bureau, separate from the Foreign Ministry. Take note, because Nkrumah didn't believe that Africans should be part of the Foreign Ministry. It is not foreign. An African is not foreign. For Kwame Nkrumah, every African was a citizen of Africa and could not be a foreigner on African soil. That's why I feel at home here. This was a view he held firmly until his passing in 1972. In Class Struggle in Africa, another of his books published in 1968, he declares, "All people of African descent, whether they live in America, Europe, or the Caribbean, are Africans and belong to the African nation." So not just Africans on the continent, but Africans born outside the continent are Africans and part of the African nation that must be. Jeffrey Ahlen, an academic who spoke at the African Studies Association meeting in 2006, said that Nkrumah's Ghana celebrated a national identity defined through the continental struggle. So our national identity was defined through the continental struggle for an independent and united Africa. Major activities demonstrating this Pan-African approach took place Immediately following our independence, the Conference of Independent African States, just a year after independence, the All-African Peoples Conference also took place. Take note, not just the Conference of Heads of States, but all African peoples, civil society, students, workers, trade unions. People's Conference was held the same year. Delegates, over 300 from all over the continent and from the global African family attended. If you see the lists of the steering committee members, you would wonder. They came from almost every single country on the continent and the Caribbean and from North America. From here, I believe, okay, I will find the name. We'll come back to who came from South Africa. I know you were represented. After Ghana became a republic in 1960, that was such an important year for us because the Queen ceased to be our head of state and we got our very own constitution and we became a republic. That year was a great year for women. In Ghana, the All-African Women's Conference took place in Accra. Women from all over, African women, attended. Nkrumah asked them in his opening address, what part can the women of Africa and the women of African descent play in the struggle for African emancipation? He said, you must ask these questions by positive action, the only language understood by the detractors of African freedom. That same year, we passed an affirmative action bill that allowed 10 women to enter parliament, because before that, there weren't any. These women who met in 1960 were part and parcel of the campaign to set up the Organization of African Unity, our first institution that would guide us as to how to unite as a continent. Today, women are important in the journey towards a united Africa. It won't happen. It won't happen without the full participation and involvement of the women of Africa. I hope you are ready. I am ready. So in that same year, 1960, the African Affairs Bureau was tasked with a program to support freedom fighters with resources, training, and a base. We had bases in our country from which to do their work. In collaboration with the Ideological Institute, because it wasn't enough to train the body, we had to train the mind. About 800 freedom fighters from all corners of Africa, including this dear country, were trained between 62 and 64. By that time, Kwame Nkrumah had recognized that Southern Africa's liberation struggle, like that of Algeria, necessitated armed struggle, unlike Ghana's constitutional and non-violent path to independence. In 1961, Kwame Nkrumah called on Commonwealth nations and all nations of the world to put pressure on South Africa through political and economic sanctions to abandon apartheid. In 1965, Ghana under Nkrumah threatened to withdraw from the Commonwealth in protest at the unilateral declaration of independence by the Ian Smith government in the then Rhodesia, unless Britain intervenes to address the plight of Africans in the country. To Nkrumah, the UDI was illegal and treasonable, a treasonable declaration. And it highlighted the disparities in land distribution between the black and white population. What was the overarching vision then of these two giants? Both Kwame Nkrumah and Chief Luthuli believed that the fight for liberation was essentially a fight for democracy, for peace, and for justice. In a speech at the function held on 1st of February 1958 and organized by the South African Congress of Democrats, Chief Luthuli made the point. Those of us who are in the freedom struggle in this country have really one gospel. We may possibly shade it in different ways, but it is a gospel of democracy and freedom. If we are true to South Africa, that must be our vision, a vision of South Africa as a fully democratic country. Apartheid rule is the antithesis of democracy. Kwame Nkrumah agreed 100%. He said, "It is ironic to think that the rulers of South Africa call themselves Christians. Apartheid and nuclear weapons must shake the conscience of the Christian world." These are no mean words coming from two religious leaders. Kwame Nkrumah said in his speech in Accra in 1960 that this is what he said in 1960 in a speech on positive action. But he's also known to have declared during our independence struggle that it was far better to be free to govern or misgovern ourselves than to be governed by anyone else. Both leaders significantly, and I think we, the members of the family of those great leaders, we understand and know that very well from our experience, that both leaders were ready to pay the ultimate price. Kwame Nkrumah said that he's fully aware of the dangers to which he's exposed, but that he's of the firm conviction that his country's cause comes first. He said that he's prepared, if need be, to shed his blood and die, that Ghana might have self-government now. On his part, Chief Luthuli made a public statement after he was dismissed by the apartheid government as a chief. He said, "What the future has in store for me, I do not know. It might be ridicule, imprisonment, concentration camp, flogging, banishment, and even death. I only pray to the Almighty to strengthen my resolve so that none of these grim possibilities may deter me from striving for the sake of the good name of our beloved country, the Union of South Africa, to make it a true democracy and a true union in form and spirit of all the communities in the land." It is no surprise then that both brothers went on to win. They went on to win international peace prizes. Chief Luthuli won the prestigious Nobel Peace Prize, as we heard, the first African to do so in 1961. Kwame Nkrumah, on the other hand, in 1964, won the Lenin Peace Prize. Now, these awards were not mere decorations, but the recognition of their immense contribution to world peace. It was also a testimony to their unrelenting and uncompromising belief that peace in one part of the world was inextricably linked to the peace in all other parts. Upon receiving his prize, Chief Luthuli prayed for the day when the people of the world will rouse themselves and together effectively stamp out any threat to peace in whatever quarter of the world it may be found. A year later, 3 years later, as Kwame Nkrumah received his award, he said there can be no peace in the world until imperialism and colonialism are abandoned and not tolerated as instruments of policy in international relations. In fact, on the day of the counter-revolutionary rebellion in Ghana, that is the coup d'etat of 1966, which toppled the Nkrumah government, he was actually on his way to Hanoi to broker peace between Washington and Hanoi. It took 30 years later for him to be named the African of the Millennium in a popular survey, popular survey conducted by the BBC at the turn of the century. Who is the African of the Millennium? And Kwame Nkrumah was popularly voted as the African of the, not the century, the millennium. So who says that African people don't want African unity? Now we must, within that framework, evaluate the condition of our mother continent today and reflect on whether we found a measure of peace after national liberation. In the 20th century, the greatest threat to us, to peace, was colonialism in all its forms. This was what our fathers and mothers had to grapple with. The question to ask is the world more peaceful today? Are we devoid of the threats to peace that Chief Luthuli and Kwame Nkrumah talked about? Are we safe in our continent surrounded by the ever-growing number of foreign military bases and personnel in our countries? Can we say we are safer given the presence of external hands in our affairs, even at the continental level? We must ponder these developments. But beyond the notion of war and peace in its physical features, let us not forget about justice. There can be no peace without economic justice. The ideal of a dignified living where workers are paid fair wages, people earning enough to compensate for their labor. Our world today represents a reality where a great many are trapped in a cycle of poverty in the midst of plenty. The world's population of 7.6 billion people have enough food to feed about 10 billion people. Yet almost we are told by experts that 800 million people globally struggle to get food to eat. And I'm very sad to say that a lot of them are here in our mother continent. They could even be your next door neighbor. Global wealth is so concentrated in fewer hands that a very small number of people control so much wealth, far greater than the wealth of billions of people combined. That is the world we live in today. It is a world where the wheels of economic justice are grinding too slowly. If they have not already halted for the millions of African people living in shacks and struggling to feed themselves, while their vast mineral wealth, gold, cobalt, diamond, the list is endless, is being carted away to enrich others. It is a world where Africa is still not in total control of its economy or in total ownership of our resources. It is a world where Africa is still not united. But there's hope and promise. When you think that the average African is a young person, that about 3/4 of our population is young, a great many of them bristling with energy and ideas and talent, as we've seen today, this is something to be hopeful about. No doubt we stand on the shoulders of our forefathers and mothers. But of what use will telling their stories be if we cannot build on their noble work and transform our continent into the prosperous land it was meant to be for its citizens and the whole world, really? We desire a world of social and economic justice, peace and prosperity. For us in Africa, it is even more so, because from beneath our land that much of the progress of the world springs. We do not accept to remain the vast well from which the world drinks, while we, many of us, remain thirsty. But it is obvious that we can't achieve much if we are divided. United we stand, the adage goes, and divided we fall. And a house divided against itself cannot stand. The only way we can have the power to own and control our resources is to unite, to think, plan, and work together. The African unity, we can at once, through African unity rather, we can at once deal with border disputes, have a coordinated defense system, a bigger voice on international stage, and of course, that stronger currency that will be backed by our resources. We will be in a position to industrialize without damaging our environment and make the great Sahara Desert bloom with vegetation, as Nkrumah promised in '63. These are just a few of the benefits we stand to gain from unity. In his seminal work, Africa Must Unite, published in '63 and distributed to African leaders on the eve of the founding of the OAU in Addis Ababa, Nkrumah maintains that the obstacle to our development is our division into mostly small, economically unviable states, and therefore our independence without unity is insufficient to achieve development. They understood that. But what unity was he urging us so passionately to contemplate? Nkrumah argues further in Africa Must Unite that for economic unity to be effective, it must be accompanied by political unification, political union. For the two are inseparable. He insists that the way forward is the political and economic unification of Africa. He warned us many times that without political unity, African states will never commit themselves to full integration. Because come to think about it, having the same currency. Isn't that a big political decision? The political union conception Nkrumah championed entailed a continental union government in charge of economic development, defense, and foreign policy. These are the main things we have to unite on. While other government functions can be discharged by African states in a federal fashion within central political organizations. So we won't lose all our sovereignty, just in those three all-important matters: the economy, defense, and foreign policy. The case for the political unification of African states to guide all forms of integration is more compelling now than ever. After years of struggling with the piecemeal approach to unity, we can now revisit the original call for political unity. There have been excellent proposals put forward over the years. The 1980 Lagos Plan of Action that envisaged and integrated common markets. The Abuja Treaty with its African Economic Community and Economic Monetary Union. Yeah, we figured all that a long time ago, but they all failed to become a reality. Even more recently, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I fear that it would be difficult to implement effectively without political unity. We have also recognized the global African family as the sixth region, or the African diaspora, as some people say, as the sixth region. But we are yet to make this recognition legally binding in the African Union Constitution. By the way, Ghana over the last few years has granted citizenship to some Africans born outside the continent who have settled in the country. So far, about 200. And in fact, as I landed here in your dear country, about 126 people were granted the citizenship. Africans from outside the continent were granted the Ghanaian citizenship. Now, half a century ago, Nkrumah said that the most important thing at the time was that all leaders of Africa should pursue unselfishly, honestly, and with a singleness of purpose, the twin task of making their territories genuinely free and unfettered from foreign domination, and seeking the greater strength which can only come through union with other African states. Now just imagine an Africa where our leaders are prepared to cede some powers to a supranational continental body, showing real commitment to the well-being of her citizens. Imagine an Africa in which popular determination for unity is so overwhelming that our leaders have no option but to follow the people's voice. Imagine. But for that to happen, the intellectual revolution that would stand behind the social revolution that Nkrumah calls for in his book Conscientism, Ideology and Philosophy for Decolonization. He called for an intellectual revolution to stand behind the social revolution. He said for that to happen, that intellectual revolution must take root in our consciousness, consolidating our African belief systems while taking into account the unavoidable influences of Western Islamic and Euro-Christian elements. We don't have to reject them. We can absorb them and accommodate them, but never forget our base. We must above all maintain an independence of thought at the highest level possible to allow for the liberating African consciousness to emerge and contribute to the harmonious growth and progress of our society. I was so happy to hear us talking this morning about how to think of introducing Pan-African thoughts as a degree course in the years to come in our university. African unity is our strongest response to the challenges confronting us over the last 500 years. Military defeat, enslavement, colonialism, and apartheid colonialism, and now economic marginalization and domination. For me personally, nothing excites me better than the hope that African unity will give to our children. They will grow up knowing that if they apply themselves, they can be whatever they want to be, because with the ownership of our resources and control of our economies, we can create the environment in which these talents will blossom. And they will have more than 1 billion brothers and sisters supporting them at every turn. This alone is a precious, priceless gift that we can give our children. Each time I reflect on the African situation, I ask myself, our mothers and our fathers gave us a great opportunity, an Africa that asserted itself and regained national liberation and political independence. What are we going to bequeath our children? I believe strongly and sincerely that African unity will be our best gift to them. Otherwise, God help us. What are we going to know what to tell Chief Luthuli and Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah when we meet them on the other side? What are we going to tell them? My brothers and sisters, Africa must unite. Africa must unite. Africa must unite. I thank you for your attention. And long live the African nation that must be. This is my mantra every morning. Long live the African nation that must be. I thank you.
Wow, wow. Truly, truly inspiring. Thank you so, so much for those